It's almost indescribable. It's something that we want to look away from, but I thank you for covering it, Dana, because our audience needs to be reminded who we're up against. And we need to be reminded who we're up against because there's this conversation in the United States about whether these are Palestinian freedom fighters or Hamas militants. These are terrorists that are doing things that we haven't seen since ISIS, right? Since they were in the height of their power and cutting the heads off of reporters. And Hamas terrorists have even taken it to another level. I mean, every day there's new reports of rapes, of murders. You're talking about terrorists going into kibbutzes or into apartment buildings and not sparing women, not sparing children. You know, I saw an IDF commander say this. It's important to note that this is not a battlefield where you expect to see casualties and where you expect to see, you know, the atrocities of war. These are civilian apartment buildings. These are civilian towns where there was no mercy, where people were burned alive in their cars. And I think it takes a special, horrible monster to be able to kill children and babies indiscriminately.
You've served in the U.S. military, you've served in the Trump administration as well as the State Department. Here is Jake Sullivan yesterday, National Security Advisor, about U.S. forces potentially.
Would you put American forces on the ground to help out?
At this point, that is not something that is under planning. What we are focused on when we talk about sending experts, it is people who can work on intelligence, who can work on overall planning, who can work on coordination with the Israeli government. We are not currently sending forces to Israel, and I'll leave it at that for now. Yeah.
You know, it's a for now situation, Morgan, but there are American hostages on the ground, and you have to think there's some coordination between the U.S. and the Israelis on that front.
It was certainly, we have to do everything we can to get our Americans home. And I know that there's negotiations going on behind the scenes to try and get that done. And obviously we have capabilities that I won't talk about on air, but that can be used to get Americans home if we need to. Listen, the danger here, Brett, of course, is we know that this could turn into a regional conflict very quickly. We're already seeing exchange of fire between Lebanese Hezbollah in the north and Israel. It was reported that some rockets came from Syria overnight into the Golan Heights. That's an area that just a year ago, in September, I was standing on the Golan Heights looking at the area that under President Trump we recognized as Israel's sovereign territory. And you could see how close Iran and Syria could get there. And so, again, it's also important to remember Iran not only funded, trained, and equipped Hamas, who committed these terrorist attacks, but they similarly fund, train, and equip Hezbollah, which has been starting some minor attacks from Lebanon, but certainly anything coming from Syria is also Iran-backed. So there's a few things immediately that this administration can do that doesn't involve putting troops on the ground. First of all, start enforcing the sanctions that have given Iran $80 billion more in oil revenue. They have not been enforced for the past 3 years, and that could take at least $80 billion off the table right away if they were properly enforced. Freeze that $6 billion that's in that escrow account in Qatar. There is absolutely no reason why the Iranians need to have access to those funds. And finally, in just about 7 days, there is another arms embargo against Iran that expires at the UN. One already expired, the conventional arms ban, a few years ago, but in about 7 days, ballistic missiles and these suicide drones that we see Iran giving to Russia and employing on the battlefield in Ukraine, those actually, the sanctions actually lift at the UN on ballistic missiles and suicide drones against Iran. That needs to put back into place today.
Morgan Ortagus, thank you so much.